This is 7 Days to Die, and after being in development for over 10 years, I finally decided why not try it out. But what is 7 Days to Die? It's a survival horror zombie game built on a voxel-based world, allowing you, the player, to break anything and dig holes anywhere, if that's something you want to do, I guess. So almost the zombie survival version of Minecraft. But the question here is, 10 years, really? But to understand that, we gotta look where it all started. The game's origins began as a campaign on the website Kickstarter, and to this day has 13,876 backers, with a huge pledge of $507,612, and even sold a higher tier pledge that allowed you to put yourself in the game as a zombie, which is still in the game till this day, and even included other smaller tiers where you can have a settlement or a town named after you. But the highest of the tiers were never reached, for good reason I think. But with the success of their Kickstarter, it didn't come without its negatives, and with just a quick glance at the comments on their campaign page, you can see it. Pledgers not getting the game they pledged for a very long time, and certain tiers stating they would get the game on full release or when it reached beta builds. But the game didn't leave alpha till this year, 2024, which honestly might just come down to bad communication, because a few of the comments mentioned if you just contact Fun Pimps, they'd give you the Steam key within a few days. Talking of Fun Pimps, the development wasn't super easy for them either. In 2016, they decided to partner with Telltale Publishing to help bring the game to the consoles, hopefully to expand their audience. But within only 2 years, in 2018, Telltale went bankrupt, leading to Fun Pimps terminating their agreement with them in hopes of regaining control of the game's future, which only came to fruition in 2020. When Fun Pimps officially regained the control of the console publishing rights, which left the game's development on console in limbo for about 2 years, which I can imagine would have only left the player base confused and frustrated at the state of the game, whilst development continued as normal on the PC branch. Which brings us up to current times, with full release coming to both console and PC simultaneously, but the question stands, if the development would have been smoother and without the awkward legal process, maybe they wouldn't have taken as long as they did. But looking to the full release of the game, a lot of the negative talk I've heard is surrounding the price hike at release. The game originally came out into early access on December the 13th, 2013, at a full price of £26.99. Well, in the UK that is. And over time, it went down to £18.99. As like a lot of games, they decrease in price after a while to attract more players and keep the appeal. Then from there, 7 Days stayed at £18.99 for the next 10 years, with some nice Steam sales sprinkled in, sometimes taking the game down to a nice £5. So, good steal. Well, that was until the game released in 1.0, over 10 years later on July the 25th, 2024, where the price increased from the reasonable £18.99 to a whopping £37.99, which is over double the price it sat at for the last 10 years. And understandably, this rubbed a lot of players the wrong way, and I can't honestly understand how they thought this was a good idea. In the grand scheme, I can only see this damaging the game's longevity and putting new players off from buying it at all, and even making the original player base feel like the devs are just cashing in. Then it doesn't help that the developers are also making another game that looks suspiciously similar to 7 Days, and they're trying to make it a standalone game as well. Not good. The last bit of info I've seen online, and through Steam reviews, is a lot of talk around the game's change over time, where it's changed too much, with a lot of the long-time game players leaving negative reviews. Talk about the game's changes from its sandbox survival roots to more of a focus on looting and kill grinding. But they did speak about being able to go through old updates and still play how it was, which I did try, but kept having weird issues with the game not being able to load in the traders. So unfortunately, I couldn't try it out for myself. But a lot of the developers' negatives seem to come down to lack of communication through their Kickstarter and maybe some unlucky circumstances around their legal problems. But how do you guys think 7 Days came out in the end? Because at the end of the day, I'm just a guy coming in to experience the game at a finished state and would love to hear from some of the long-standing players. Before we can jump into my impression of the game, you need to understand the gameplay loop. Spawning in, you'll start off pretty much naked in the middle of nowhere, similar to a lot of survival games. But the game's nice enough to give you a basic tutorial to get you started. Then, when you've done that, time to meet our first trader. And this guy's a real ass.
You got a fucking crush on me or something?
Jesus, man. And here begins the quest loop. You'll have to complete a certain amount of quests, then you'll get introduced to another trader. taking you to another biome and bringing you to harder quests and better rewards. And from there, it's a little bit of a rinse and repeat on the quests, with a total of 5 different biomes and 5 traders. And now that's out of the way, let's go to my experience with the game. And something I really loved is looting. I'm an absolute loot goblin when it comes to games. Thanks Tarkov for that one. But 7 Days to Die has extensive amounts of loot or items for you to use. And you acquire these by, you guessed it, looting. Finding rubbish on the roads, hidden in bags, or other containers you find in the world. But if you venture into buildings, you'll find much better loot, depending on the building's danger level, which can range from 1 red skull to 5. But from what I understand, is that when you visit different biomes, the skulls can have an added orange skull for extra difficulty, potentially getting as high as 5 red skulls and 2 extra orange ones. But don't quote me on that, I just know it's harder. So if you're going into a building unprepared, it might not end too well. But back to the buildings in general. A great feature of the game that I find semi-addicting is every house you venture into is its own little dungeon, or massive dungeon. They all have a route planned out for you, so you slowly encounter enemies and loot along the way. Also, the game's sneaky way of giving you a mini heart attack every once in a while. But after venturing through the hordes, you'll finally make it to the loot room, having some more impressive loot crates, and sometimes even locked containers, for you to lockpick open if you've got the skill. And speaking of skills, the leveling in 7 Days to Die is a little weird. At first, you start off with a few level points to put into some of the general skills, but a lot of the progression in the game is based around magazines, which you'll need to find in the world through your looting escapades. But when you begin to find them, you'll slowly level your knowledge in these areas and unlock more tech and weapons for you to create, which I do think leaves a lot of the game's progression to RNG, but there is ways to sway the odds in your favour. First off, as you play the game, you gain experience from killing enemies, completing quests, and performing other tasks like building and crafting, allowing you to level your main skills, which allow you to spec into certain builds, giving you extra damage with certain weapons, and even a higher chance to find weapons of that type, or more magazines related to that skill in the world. But still, it does take a lot of luck, so either hope you find what you need, or one of the traders graces you with them. Then with co-op play, magazine collecting gets more complicated. If you want to avoid having to loot tons and tons of the same magazine, you'll most likely choose one of your group to focus on one. For example, in my playthrough with my friends, I was the crafter, so I used all the workstation magazines so we could acquire the forge and the workbenches a lot faster, allowing us to progress further, making new weapons and more materials. And with all these new materials, it's time to make a base. With your levels progressing and loot building up, you need to choose your base location, either in a pre-existing building or create your own. And I'm definitely a pre-existing building kind of player. Your base, like other games of the genre, is where you'll stock all your supplies and your loot. Also, where you'll end up crafting all your future weapons and armor, with the new workstations you've acquired. Also, as time goes on, and you start to make new materials, you can slowly strengthen your foundations, even build up defenses, traps, and turrets, to keep out those pesky Zeds, or the inevitable Demolisher, coming to ruin your day. And this is where the nightmare begins. Firstly, the Horde Nights come every 7 days, hence the name of the game, and with each 7 days that passes, each Horde Night gets a little worse, bringing in harder enemies to destroy you and your base, and maybe your friends if you've got them too. And the way to survive this event is to do just that, survive by any means necessary. You can use the previously mentioned traps and turrets to hold off the undead, or even make a whole other base just for the Horde defense. And hopefully, you'll come out the other side with more loot, tons of XP, and maybe your life, if you're lucky. I think this event really brings a fun repeatability to the game, giving you mild anxiety about the coming fight, and also a little bit of excitement. You end up spending the week planning and rushing around building the best base you can, and trying to stockpile enough ammo and explosives to make the Horde Night a blast. As the Horde Night approaches, you'll discover there's a large assortment of enemies, one being the Demolisher, who's a higher level enemy that appears later in the Horde Nights. But mainly, you come up against easier groups of enemies, but as soon as nighttime hits, this easy bunch becomes a little more intimidating, as they all turn into sprinters, so you might want to stay inside at first until you get used to the combat. And yes, this means every Horde Night, they all sprint. But I can hear you saying, it's all good, I can take a bunch of normal Zeds, sounds easy. No. The further you get, the more special Zeds you get. From just your tanky Zeds like the Biker and the Lumberjack, to then some truly special ones, like the Cop Zombie or the Mutated Zombie, which both throw something at you. And the Cop even explodes. But there are less tanky enemies, like the Screamer, which obviously, and you should probably take her out quite quickly. Otherwise, you've got a lot of problems coming. But the zombies evolution doesn't stop there. And if you didn't like the night sprinters, you're gonna love the ferals. They sprint, sun up or sun down, and not to mention, they have a large health pool. So, really not that fun. Then when you start to truly get further into the game, you begin to meet radiated zombies. More health again, still sprinting, and this time, they can heal over time, so kill them quickly. Well, if you can. And just to top it off, the worst of them all, animal enemies. The dreaded dog. If this bastard doesn't give you a fright, then you must be He-Man or something. Then there's this hunk of meat. Just run, there's no point. But as you progress through the game, leveling and exploring, the game stage increases. This is the number that determines how hard the enemies will be, so you'll always face a challenge. This is calculated by the time alive and the level of your character. It can also be affected by where you are in the world. There is a good side of the game stage though. As the game stage increases, the loot does too. So you'll find loot that will match up to your level. Another thing in 7 Days to Die is the pure chaos. In solo you get the chaos of the Horde Night and the hectic loot runs, but in co-op it becomes madness. But in all honesty, 7 Days to Die really shines in co-op. Just chilling with your friends, counting down to the Horde Night, some of you working on the base defences, whilst others go out and look for much needed rare items. And when you finally level enough, go and loot one of the big buildings. Chaos ensues. My final thoughts though, as someone who's only really played the 1.0 build, the game's great and tons of fun, with friends or solo. And I have also seen there's some pretty big mods out there too. My advice though, when the game goes on sale, try and convince a few friends to pick it up, and just have fun with it. I know there's some negativity around the devs, don't let that stop you from having a fun, chaotic time with some friends. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, let me know in the comments, and leave a like and subscribe for more.